Ayes are 69, the noes are 44. The Part 2 as amended is agreed to. The question now is that Part 3 stand part. Honourable David
Mr Chairman, if I might begin by expressing deep regret at the undue haste with which the previous part was concluded. Chairman, I think that is a matter of great disappointment, noting that members on this side of the House had not had the opportunity to address legitimate amendments, that members had been planning on the basis of multiple calls.
Point of order, Tim Magnet.
Mr Chair, the member is trifling with your ruling. You've made it very clear, you've explained it in a way that is fair, and he should be required to get on with discussing the motion under consideration at this moment.
To the point of order.
I'll hear the member.
The member would be quite right if I had taken a point of order, but as I did not, and was using my time in my speech, the member is out of order, Mr Chairman.
It is inappropriate that members at any point refer to Speaker's rulings either by point of order or in their speech. So I think the matter having now been dealt with, we should proceed. Honourable David Cunliffe.
Mr Chairman, if you would detect a degree of frustration on the part of members of this side of the House who are not wanting to be unreasonable, sir, but find themselves in the very difficult position that we're having to do the job essentially of a first and second reading speech and a committee series of speeches under extraordinary time pressure. Now, there are major issues of principle at stake in this part of the bill in terms of the interrelationship, Mr Chairman, of portfolio investment entities and look-through companies and LAQCs. Those are vehicles which hold hundreds of millions of dollars of assets, which are essential to the country's savings regime, and for which potential tax losses could also reach the hundreds of millions of dollars. And we are having to condense a first principles discussion of whether LAQCs should be replaced by look-through companies alongside detailed discussion covering some 70 pages of cross-reference amendments, sir, which we need to go back to the primary bill to try to understand on the hoof how the material which is in the amendment changes the sense of the underlying clauses. That we are trying to do both of those things at the same time and witnessing an extraordinary abuse and a very risky abuse and a very sad abuse by a minister who had erstwhile a strong reputation for process. And I really do want to put on record my personal disappointment at the circumstances that the House finds itself in. Sir, I previously raised at the level of first principles, and I am going to cover off on a couple of these points in this part, the question of the magnitude of the tax loss which is not being stemmed through what my colleague Mr Mallard called the see-through company regime, which is probably a pretty good description. It's actually called a look-through company regime, but see-through is probably about right because the whole thing is pretty see-through, pretty flimsy, a kind of tax negligee, if you were, and the revenue consequences are likely to be negligible. We asked, sir, how much of the $2.2 billion of avoidance was going to be dealt with. The best advice that we'd received earlier was that it would be only $130 million. We think that's inadequate. We think it's a step in the right direction, but by no means far enough. We would like, sir, to have had access through the Select Committee process to the option development. And, sir, let me now raise a very important point which hasn't been raised yet in the debate. There is no regulatory impact statement, and I call on the Minister, if he was listening, to confirm to the House whether or not the matters contained in this SOP in Part 3 were referred to the Treasury's Regulatory Impact Assessment Unit. If they were, as they are required to be, whether they received a RIS, where that regulatory impact statement appears and why it's not been tabled in the House. Now, sir, if there is a good reason why that was not required in this House, let's hear it, because these are matters of millions of dollars of revenue. Sir, one of the key things that we need to decide in terms of this part is how the change from LAQCs to LTCs, to look-through companies, will affect the relative attractiveness of property investment versus other forms of savings investment. And I think it's common knowledge around New Zealand that this is a hugely important issue at this time. The whole country, sir, is suffering because of the effects of the global financial crisis. And locally in the New Zealand markets, which have been crippled by that event, the severest impact was because our property bubble was overinflated. And one of the principal reasons for that, sir, was because of the unduly favourable tax treatment, and hey presto, part of that was the matter under consideration in this bill. And what had happened was too much resource went through LAQCs to property, not enough through portfolio investment entities. Now, on clause 78B on page 62 of the SOP, we see notification requirements for multi-rate portfolio investment entities set out. They're a little hard to understand because you have to cross-reference them back against clause 78. The difficulty, sir, is the whole concept of multi-rate PIEs when lined up...
Mr. Chairman. Honourable Peter Dunn.
Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to take a call to